Good day, class. Welcome to Tax 4861 for the year. This is an exam technique session that I want to actually go through with you guys to make sure that you guys know how to actually answer tax questions properly, especially discussion questions. In exams, normally the number crunch questions are answered properly. So around about, I would imagine that just from past marking and speaking to people in the department, there's an average mark of around about 60% for questions that are number crunch in nature. However, the discussion questions generally tend to have average marks between 25 to 35%. So I'm going to concentrate on how you answer discussion questions for this first session. What I want you to do is I'm going to show you two questions and I want you to attempt them in your own time. And then what will happen is, please pause the recording, and what will happen is I will then go through all of the solutions with you. So here's the first one. So it says, imagine you own a supermarket in a shopping center and a prominent supermarket chain insists that you be removed from the shopping center as a condition of their new lease. The shopping center kicks you out of the center and you sue them, winning a 5 million compensation claim for unfair termination of lease. What would the tax implications be? So I'd like you guys to think about how to actually answer that question. In addition to that, there's a second question I'd like you to have a look at. Okay, this is an unseen question. I'm not showing you the solution until you've tried the question. I'd like you to read through this question, and I would like you to attempt this question. It's 18 marks. You've got 27 minutes to try and actually answer for the 18 marks itself. So I'd like you to give this an attempt to see whether you can actually do this properly. So once you've actually done both of the questions, I'd like you to come back to this recording and I will go through how each of the solutions is done. Please attempt the questions now. And please press pause on this video. Okay, so let's start. The supermarket question. Let's see whether you know how to answer a tax discussion question properly. So the first place to start is always going to be looking at what the required is. It says, what would the tax implications be? So what each of you should have done is you should have actually considered this question. Now, one of the best ways to deal with tax implications questions is to know all of the taxes that you actually require to know for your CTA. So what taxes are you required to know? You're required to know donations tax. You're required to know estate duty. You're required to know income tax. Even though capital gains tax is part of income tax, I like to actually show it separately. So CGT you need to know. You also need to know dividends tax. And you're also required to know how to do that. So whenever a question looks at you and says that, what are the tax implications? You need to cover all of those basic tax types over there. And if you don't do that, you are going to get into trouble. So first things first, okay? Is there donations tax? No, there isn't donations tax. There's no donation over here. Is there estate duty? No. Income tax? I'm going to put income tax and I'm going to put a question mark there. CGT? I'm going to put a question mark there. Dividends tax, there's no dividends tax, and VAT, maybe there's some VAT. Okay, so it might be income tax, it might be capital gains tax. We're going to need to actually have a look at stuff. Now, what sometimes happens in a tax question is you're going to get something that's so far from left field that you're not going to have actually seen it ever before, and that's why they ask it to you in a discussion question. So I want you to just consider this. As we go through each of the different tax sections, what we're going to do is we're going to need to understand what the baseline is for each of the taxes. So let's start with VAT. So in this question, a shopping center kicks you out and you sue them, winning a 5 million compensation claim for termination of lease. So if you want to determine whether there's VAT on this transaction, you're going to have to know what the charging section for VAT is. So what's going to happen with VAT? VAT is levied on the supply of goods and services by a registered vendor. And that's the charging section. You're not going to find a specific section where they're going to discuss compensation claims if you look at the VAT Act itself. So what do you need to do? You need to use the general rules. So what you would basically do here is you would actually need to determine, has there been a supply? Now, I'm sure none of you know how to do supply for VAT and know what the definition is, but that's why you've got a SACA legislation handbook. And when I do the VAT section with you, I'm going to actually get you to highlight the definition of VAT, which includes supply, and you will be able to look to see whether there is a supply there of goods or services. A 5 million compensation claim, is that a good? It's definitely not a good. But maybe it's a service. So you're going to have to go through and consider whether it's a service. So you will look at the definition of services, and you'll see whether compensation claims actually fall under the definition of services. And if there's VAT is levied on the supply, if there's a supply of a service by a vendor, someone carrying on an enterprise, and we've got to assume that the shopping center would be registered for that, then there's going to be VAT on this transaction. You're going to account for it. But this is the way that you need to approach it. From an income tax perspective, you're going to have to consider whether the 5 million compensation claim is, and for gross income, you'll turn to the gross income definition. You'll say, is there amount? Yes, there is. Received by or accrued to, it's received by you. Okay? During the year of assessment, yes. Okay? Not of a capital nature. I don't know whether it's capital or not. You need to look at the facts of the case. But the chances are that you're not involved in a scheme of profit making here. You don't ask to be kicked out of the shopping center. You're looking for compensation for a certain claim. And generally with compensation claims, you'll see when we do gross income, they say which hole is being filled. Are you filling a capital hole or a revenue hole with it? And you're going to need to discuss whether this is gross income or not. If you decide that this is capital, you're going to have to go into CGT. And what happens with CGT? CGT is levied on the disposal of an asset. Has there been a disposal of an asset yet? Could you say a compensation claim for termination of lease is the disposal of an asset? And you'd go through each of these general things. Now, this is supposed to be hard. I specifically chose something that was very, very difficult for you to do, just to give you the idea. So a lot of the time, you're going to need to know what the basic charging sections are going to be. That is levied on the supply of goods or services by an enterprise, or income tax, total amounts in cash or otherwise received by accrued to not of a capital nature, or CGT. CGT is levied on the disposal of an asset. You need to know all of these charging sections, and that would be tax implications. Just in summary again, it says what would the tax implications be? If you do get a question like this, list all the types of taxes and see what applies. Then, in general, if there's a specific section, you'll go to the specific section and use it. In this case, there are no specific sections that are there. Okay? So if you don't have a specific section, what are you going to do? You're going to go to the basic section. The basic VAT section, the basic income tax section, and the basic CGT section. And that is the way that you would approach something like this. So that is this question. And it's the process that you use to actually go through and approach this that will help you actually answer a question properly in an exam. So I hope that you've learned a lesson compared to what solution you wrote down for this. And hopefully the next time you do a discussion question, this may actually help you towards it. I don't expect you to know how to do this properly. We're going to do lots and lots of discussion questions in class. And I hope that each time we do a discussion question, you get better and better at doing it. The next question I asked you to do. This one's a little bit more specific. So what happens is I've just given you, the first question was a general question, and I showed you how to go to general sections to actually do it. This one is a specific question. So there's specifics involved, and there's a separate section in each of the acts for dealing with it. So again, let's have a look at the required and let's see what happens. It says, discuss the VAT implications for the two matters for the company. Okay, includes 2 marks for communication skills and layout. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to just consider the required first. Where it says discuss VAT implications, it means that you only need to discuss VAT. So unlike the previous question whereby there were 7 different taxes we had to consider, this one we only need to consider VAT. So it's limited to VAT. The second thing that you need to consider is you need to look to see whether there's a limited period to which the solution requires. Now this one just says discuss the VAT implications. for something like this, because there's no time sensitivity in the required, you're going to have to discuss every single VAT scenario, irrespective of which year it ends up in. So you'll see that there's the year 2005, and we are now 15 years later in 2020. Does that mean that we need to discuss what happened in 2005? And the answer is yes, we are going to need to actually discuss it in our solution, because it doesn't limit the time. It says discuss the VAT implications of the two matters for the company. You need to discuss everything in the solution. So if there's no time sensitivity, you discuss everything for year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, everything that's actually put out there in front of you. So let's just have a look at this, and we're going to go through the question. Now, I've got a particular way that I like to actually just deal with stuff here. It says VAT implications. So I like to list all transactions when I'm going through a question. So let me just explain the logic behind it. There are 18 marks there inside the question that you need to answer. Now, certain things are number crunch, certain things aren't. So the typical VAT discussion question, or actually any discussion question in tax, will include things with numbers and certain things without numbers. So let's just discuss this concept with you to make sure that you understand it. So if there are numbers inside a discussion question, you're required to calculate. The word discuss means that you need to calculate and discuss. So whenever you see that word discuss inside a required, what you need to do is you need to calculate where possible. So discuss includes calculate. So you need to calculate as well. So what I do is, as I read through a question, I like to list the transactions. And let me explain why I would list a transaction. Because even each and every single transaction needs to have some form of tax response to it. Now, it's out of 18 marks in the question. I need to decide how many marks per point that I'm going to discuss. Okay. The second thing I like to do is, while I'm going through a question, if there's a number crunch to be done, I like to estimate the number of marks for a number crunch. So just watch what I'm doing now. It says the human resources manages the following 2 queries on VAT issues. The first query concerns a luxury motor car that is owned by EDGI when it's acquired for $450, including VAT of 14% on 1 February 2005 and used from that date. So guys, that's number 1. So that's point 1. What would happen? You would be able to not claim input VAT because it's a motor car and input VAT is denied on a motor car. It says the free use of a company car was given to a managing director on 1 March 2007 as part of his employment. That would be number 2, because we are giving a car to someone to use. We are supplying a good to someone to use as part of their employment. Now, guys, because you've got the numbers for this and you're required to know 0.3% times by cost X VAT times by 15/114 times by number of months, that type of calculation, you can do a number crunch with it. What I would do in the question is I would probably just sit there and say, listen, there's at least 3 marks of number crunching in there, so I know that there's 3 marks of number crunching. It then also goes on to do this. It says the repair, maintenance, petrol and running costs are borne by EDGI. Now let me just explain. Petrol is 0 rated, so I'm going to go 3 plus 4. Okay, and let me explain why there are 2 transactions there. Whenever you're dealing with fringe benefits to employees, you buy something and then you give it to someone. So you're going to need to discuss the outputs involved when you buy the petrol, and then the inputs implications when you bought the petrol itself. That's why I've got 3 plus 4. Now, what you probably did as part of your solution is you only discussed one or the other. You either discussed the fringe benefits or you discussed buying petrol. You didn't discuss both. Whenever you're doing fringe benefit questions, you need to actually cover both of them. Repairs and maintenance and running costs are all the same. So I'm going to just treat that as 5 plus 6, because for all of those you can claim VAT on. And then it says interest is incurred on the monthly car loan. Interest is a financial service. So you need to discuss that as well. The second query concerns one of EDGI's salesmen who lives in Joburg and flew to Cape Town on a 2-day business trip. He is a full-time employee. For the first days away, the company gave him 196 Rand a day subsistence. So the company pays it. Can they claim VAT? And the company gives it to someone is their output VAT. So you need to do input and output on the subsistence allowance. The company paid for his airfare. Again, 10 plus 11. Can they claim inputs on the airfare? Do they need to charge outputs on giving him a free plane flight? As well as his accommodations and meals, 12 and 13, input and output. Okay. The company also provided him with the Volkswagen Polo for 2 days from a rental company. So again, 14 and 15, input and output. And short-term insurance is taken out on that as well, 16 and 17. So have a look at this, guys. So where there's numbers that can be crunched, we need to crunch numbers. Those are only 3 marks. You can see it marked off in blue on the screen on the right-hand side of the thing. So if I look at the 18 marks that's available in this question, guys, I've got 18 marks available. 2 marks are for communication skills and layout. So what that'll basically mean is I need to set it out logically. So I need to go query 1, query 2, set it out properly, and have a clear and concise argument. So out of the 16 marks that remain, probably 3 are for number crunch, and there are 13 for discussion. Now, this is normal in a question. Often there are spare marks available for you inside a solution. Now, guys, because there's 17 things that we need to discuss, you do not need to go into huge detail on any of the 17 points. You just need to discuss them very, very short, in a very, very short manner when you actually go through the actual solution itself. So this shows me the amount of detail I need to do each of the items. Now, I like setting up transactions and doing stuff like this because it makes sure that I answer everything. Because when you look at the solution, and I'm going to start going through the solution now, what's going to end up happening, guys, is I'm going to go and cross off each of the transactions themselves. So the first thing the solution says, on acquisition of the car, input tax credits would have been denied on acquisition of a motor car. So when I go back there, that is number 1. And there's only 1 mark for it. Input VAT denied when I bought the car. Okay. Number 2, now there were 3 marks attached to it for number crunch approximately. I estimated. Now, guys, I'm not really that worried about you getting the number crunch right, but let's just go through it. So the first thing, giving a car to a managing director represents a fringe benefit, and there's going to be VAT on the fringe benefit. Now, guys, please note, I want you to be very, very specific when you do VAT. You can't sit there and say there's going to be VAT. You won't get any marks for it. You need to say what type of VAT it is. Now, because you're supplying a car to someone, you are supplying, therefore it's an output VAT, so you would need to put that in. There's 1 mark. The number crunch, guys, as you go through it, 1, 2, 3, 4 marks actually for number crunch. I'm not worried about that formula. I haven't taught you VAT. You may have remembered it from undergrad, but there's 4 marks of number crunch in there. Everybody comfortable with that? Then have a look at the running costs. It says a further indirect receipt of the running cost by the managing director does not constitute a fringe benefit that has output VAT tax consequences. So running costs, yes, we've paid them, but in terms of the VAT Act, there's no output VAT on them. However, remember what I said to you. I said you need to discuss output and input. And it says Rich Limited will be able to claim input tax on repair, maintenance, and other running expenses. Petrol costs borne are 0 rated. So going back to the question here, I've done 2, which is the number crunch on it. 3 and 4, I've discussed. No output. Okay, and input is 0 rated for the petrol. And for the maintenance running costs, I've discussed there's no output VAT on running costs given to paid for an employee car. And I've discussed that we can claim input VAT for number 6 on each of the items. Carrying on. Interest costs are a financial service which is exempt from VAT. There's the interest, I need to say. Can't claim VAT on interest because it's a financial service. Carrying on. Subsistence allowance, and look at it, it's double whammy. Number 1, Subsistence allowance is a supply of money. Supplies of money are not subject to VAT. So there's no deemed supply. Okay? It's not a fringe benefit. There's no deemed supply for VAT. And if you look at the next page, in addition, no input tax is claimable for the company. No output, no input. So for the subsistence allowance, 8 and 9, I've done the outputs, I've done the input. The next thing in the question is going to be the airfare for 10 and 11. So airfare, can we claim input on airfare? First thing, input, I can claim. We may claim back the input tax on the airfare. So that'll be 1 mark. And then the airfare expense given to an employee. If you send someone on a business trip, you're not giving them something in their private capacity. This is a business trip. And there is a no fringe benefit that's attached onto it because this is for business purposes, it's not for private purposes. This does not go onto your pay slip if your boss sends you on a trip down to Cape Town to try sell something. So again, there's output and there is input. So again, here, 10 and 11, discussed. Accommodation and meals, guys. Okay. And I don't know whether you remember the stuff from undergrad. Guys, accommodation, meals. There is a fringe benefit because we're giving residential accommodation and meals in terms of the employee. But because you're on a business trip, it's given a null value. So how much is output? Output is 0 times 15 over 115, null. Meal expenses, taxable fringe benefit, given a null value. But remember, guys, what normally happens? Any entertainment, input VAT is denied. So you're going to need to discuss that as part of your solution. So input VAT is denied on entertainment, but there is a special rule for entertainment. It says if you're away from your usual place of residence for at least 1 night, input tax credits will be claimable. So for the question, I've now done the meals and accommodation itself. Okay. I now have a company rental card that's actually given. What are we going to do with that? Yes. Car rental and car insurance. The provision of a car is a fringe benefit. Okay, but not if you away on a business trip itself. Okay, can we claim the input VAT on the rental? The answer is no, because anytime you supplied a motor car, input VAT is denied on the supply of motor cars. Not just when you buy a car, but also when you rent a car itself. And then for the insurance, guys, what are you able to do? You need to say, for the insurance, you can claim the input VAT. Okay, and you can claim the input VAT on that. Total possible marks 26, maximum 18. So guys, it's quite common in solutions to see this. Now, I found that what happens to people is that, first of all, you read a question and you don't go back. You also highlight. I think with tax, every time there's a transaction, you need to make sure that you cover every single transaction. So as you've seen here, because I mark off the transactions, and I will do this in more detail later on, as I go through, there's 14 and 15 for giving the car, can you claim input? And then for the insurance and output and input. You need to go through. Okay? So I hope this just gives you a little bit of an insight in how maybe to actually answer a question. Okay? With any discussion question, I'm always going to start by looking at the mark plan. I'm always going to say how many number crunches inside the solution. And then I'm going to modify how much I need to write down by the amount of transactions that I need to deal with. And you can work out approximately how much to write for everything. And I hope this actually just helps you with your exam technique and how you approach stuff.